All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for Shiur this morning. To thank our TALMUD Torah sponsors for the month of Teves, the Daf Yomi Shiur, in memory of Mr. Milton Marder, Mordechai Dovid, ben Rephael HaKohen, Shirley Elbaum Family for dedicating the Sherman Drushos this month, mention of the yahrzeit of Shirley's husband, of Gerald Elbaum, Yaakov Kopel, ben R Avraham Menachem. Our Daf Yomi sponsors today, Milt Gertner, in memory of his mother, Fannie Gertner, Fruma bas Yitzchak Michel, Chaim Rothschild, the commemoration of the yahrzeit of his father, Yitzchak ben Shlomo, and Rutman for a refuah shelaimah for Aharon Michael ben Sarah. We hope that on the merit of our TALMUD Torah, all of the neshama will have an aliyah, their families and neshama, and all those who require a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. I will say with that, let us begin. So Baruch Hashem, we have a beautiful, beautiful daf. I forgot to actually put that out on the chat last night, that it is a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. First of all, a brand new parak, always something exciting about starting a brand new parak. Baruch Hashem, like a hischatshus, a renewal, new opportunities. So also with that, let us begin. So today, we begin the 9th parak of Maseches Nedarim. Rabbi Eliezer Omer. Rabbi Eliezer says as follows. So we'll say really interesting sugya. Pochsin la'adam bekavod aviv. So we'll say, so just to go ahead and frame this a little bit. So remember, we've spoken about this before, and now we're going to get a little bit more into the mechanics of HaTorah and Hafara. So remember, we loosely translate these terms. The English that's often associated with these terms is Hatorah means annulment, Hafara means revocation, which again, these are words that the English definition doesn't help us as much. We'll see the real definition when we see the process. So right now what we're going to be focusing on is Hatoras Nedarim. Now I will say, in order to go ahead and create the Hatorah, create an annulment of the Neder, what do you need? I will say, number one, what do you need? A Pesach. Remember again, we'll say, we've seen this before, all about a Pesach. What's a Pesach? A Pesach is an opening. An opening could take one of two forms. Generally, again, what an opening does is it says, had I known this piece of information, let me say it differently, had I known what I know now, then. What's the then, or when's the then? When I made the Neder, I would have never made the Neder. We have a lot of Pesach moments in life, right? Had I known then what I know now, how differently I would have lived my life. Okay. In any event, so we'll say, so that's a Pesach. That's a simple Pesach. Now I will say, the truth is, what's another form of Pesach? A common form of Pesach is charata, is remorse. And again, charata says, I regret ever having made the neder. So we'll say, so again. So therefore the Mishnah says as follows, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, poschin, la'avad bekavod aviv v'imo. So we could create a Pesach, create an opening for a neder, ultimately, again, utilizing the kavod of one's parents. Now we'll say, now what does this mean? Take a look at the Ran, top Ran. So Rabbi Eliezer Omer, poschin lo la'adam bekavod aviv v'imo. Literally, we could create a Pesach for a person using the honor of his parents. Shomrim lo, we say to the guy, so let's call him Ruvain. Right, Ruvain made a neder. And we say to Ruvain, Ilu hayisi yodea shemevazet avicha v'imecha al sha'ata kal b'nedarim. So he said to Ruvain, you made a neder. Ruvain, had you known that your neder would be an embarrassment to your parents. I will say, now to be clear, Ruvain's neder has nothing to do with his parents, right? In other words, he didn't make a neder about his parents. He just made a neder. And we say to Ruvain, had you realized that your neder would cause embarrassment to your parents, now how is the neder going to cause embarrassment to his parents? Says the Ran, Kidaminon, the Karol Rishia bar Tzadiga, Rishia bar Rishia, Kloma Yisa Noder. So let's remember again, a person who goes ahead and makes a neder is called a Rasha. We've already seen this, that Chazal did not take kindly to people who make nedarim. And ultimately, the problem is when the child becomes a Rasha, it reflects poorly on the parents. So now, how did you realize that your taking of a neder would reflect poorly on your parents? Would you have gone ahead and taken that neder? Lashon Achri, the other possibility says that on so us is always one of these interesting things. What else do we say, right? When a child does something wrong, right? The first reaction that people often have is, must have gotten that in the home. Of course, there's sometimes looking further from the truth. Parents could do everything right, Children still have their own free will about what they're going to do, what they're not going to do. But in any event, what we say to Ruvain is, had you realized that by making Nedarim, this would reflect poorly on your family, would you have still made it? So again, that's what it means when it says Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Poschen la'adam b'chavod ava v'imo. So Rabbi Eliezer says, this is a proper Pesach. And if Ruvain were to say, no, you know what? Had I realized that my taking of Nedarim would reflect poorly on my family, I would not have done it. I will say, by the way, what a profound yisod. What is Rabbi Eliezer teaching us? That whether we realize it or not, everything we do is a reflection on our family. I will say, so again, remember, we know, especially as we get older, that what our children do is not really a reflection of us, or some of it may be a reflection of us, but ultimately my child has their own bechira, has their own free will as well. But it's important when we live life to recognize that everything we do does reflect back on our family. Whether it's my parents' fault or it's not my parents' fault, l'maisa, what I do reflects back. And that requires of us a heightened level of committed behavior. Because if at the end of the day, the world is going to judge my family, my parents, my grandparents, based on how I act, rightly or wrongly, that creates a heightened level of responsibility for how I live. So Rabbi Eliezer says, this creates a proper Pesach. The Chum say, no, it doesn't work. It does not work. The Chum essentially say, this is not a proper Pesach, and therefore, again, this would not create a Pesach for a Neder. Okay, I'm Rabbi Tzadok. So Rabbi Tzadok says, well, one second, Rabbi Eliezer, if you could go ahead and create a Pesach through Kavod Aviv, the imo. In other words, so we'll say, what Rabbi Eliezer is saying is like this, just to play this out. Reuven made a Neder. We'll say, what was his Neder? His Neder was, let's just a little chazara. Konam sha'ani toim yayin, right, ad ha'katzir. Right, what does that mean? He took a Neder not to drink wine until when? Good, fig harvest, excellent, right, good. So the fig harvest, so now we call the name, we call it Reuven. You know what they say about guys who make Nedarim, you must have heard your parents making Nedarim freely at home, right? So had you realized that your Neder would go and reflect poorly on your parents, would you have made the Neder? Reuven says, no, Chasra, of course not. Good, that's a Charata, or that's a Pesach, I should say that's a Pesach, and the Neder is annulled. The Neder is annulled. So Chacham say, no, that doesn't work. Rabbi Tzabik says, well, Rabbi Eliezer, if you're going to use the honor of parents to create the Pesach, I'll do you one better. Ad sheposchen lo b'kavod aviv v'imo, yiftach lo b'kavod hamakom. Why don't you do this? Why don't we call Reuven and say, Reuven, forget about kavod of parents. What about kavod of the Ribono Shel Olam? Reuven, had you realized that your taking of a neder is an affront to God? And also remember again, this goes back to Rabbi Nosson. What does Rabbi Nosson say? Kala noder, kilu bana bama, v'hamakaimo, kilu higrif karban olav. Right, Rabbi Nosson. Again, if you make a neder, it's as if you built a bama, and if you fulfilled the neder, it's as if what? You offered up a carbon, which means every single neder presents a theological affront to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Rabbi Tzadok says, call in Reuven and say, Reuven, had you realized that your neder ultimately again is an affront to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, would you have made it? And this should create also a proper Pesach. So let's take a look at the Ryan for just a moment. I'm Rabbi Tzadok. Actually, postal of kavod aviv v'imo, postal of kavod hamakom. Kilomar, Rabbi Eliezer, kihechi d'shari liftach b'kavod aviv v'imo, shari nami liftach b'kavod hamakom. And I will say, what Rabbi Tzadok is really talking to Rabbi Eliezer. Saying, Rabbi Eliezer, if you allow the honor of parents to create a Pesach, you should certainly allow the honor of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to create a Pesach. Or I should say, create a Pesach with the honor of Hashem. He goes on, he says, Liftah b'kavod hamakom, sha'omrim, reading the Ran, sha'omrim lo, ila yisiyodeh kishnadarta, shayisamekel b'kavod hamakom. Had you realized when you made a neder, that you were treading upon the dignity, the kavod of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, da'amina b'sifri shu kinoder b'melech atzmo, klum hayisa noder. So I want to say it's pretty solid, right? Pretty solid. It's a pretty solid Pesach that Rizal is bringing up. So most of the Gemara says, Amrulo, Imkain ein Nedarim. So most say to which the Gemara responds. So it sounds like what's happening over here is the Chachamim are responding, or someone's responding. In other words, in Hagos Fitziyunim, they add in the words Amru Lo. They said back to Rabbi Tzadok, Imkain ein Nedarim. If that's the case, Rabbi said, then what? then there is never a neder. In other words, okay, we've already established every single neder in a way is an affront to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, especially again if you look at the idea of Rabbi Nassan, every single neder. So if that's the case, that you could create a Pesach by saying, had you realized that your neder is an affront to the covenant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, would you have made the neder? So we'll say, then there's no more nedarim. Now, we'll discuss in the Gemara exactly what that means. There's no more nedarim. There's no more nedarim. We'll say, Bipashtus, what it means, we're going to see in the Gemara is, we'll say, see, imagine this situation. Imagine every single time a person makes a neder, they're called in, right? And the Beis Din says, by the way, had you realized that your neder was an affront to God, would you have made it? I will say there's only one way to answer that question, which is no. You're like, well, let me get back to you. Right? Let me think about it. In other words, so it's a setup. In other words, and with that means there's never a neder. There's never a neder. So that can't be a proper Pesach. Again, we'll discuss more in the Gemara. But let's go back there. So we'll say, so here's what we have. Leaving aside Rabbi Tzaddik for now, we have a fundamental machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. Okay, so let's go with what we know. What do we know? Number one, what are the ways in which one could go ahead and essentially remove a neder is through the process of hatara. We are right now defining hatara as annulment. In order to affect hatara, what do you need? What do you need? A Pesach. What does a Pesach do? A Pesach essentially provides you now, or brings to mind information now that had you known it at the time of the neder, you would not have made the neder. So that could take the form of new information, or good old charata, just simple regret or remorse. Simple regret or remorse. So we'll say, so now, we have Rabbi Eliezer saying that honor of parents could create a proper Pesach. Had you known at the time of the neder that you're taking of a neder of being an affront to the dignity of your parents, would you have made it? And again, if Reuven says no, then L'maisa, again, that's a proper Pesach. Rabbi Eliezer says that works, Chacham say it doesn't work. However, here we go. Modim Chacham Rabbi Eliezer, B'davar shebeino lebein aviv v'imo, sheposchen lo b'chavod aviv v'imo. Oh, so we'll say, now watch this. So there is an exception to this rule. There is a case where the Chachamim will agree with Rabbi Eliezer that creating a Pesach with the honor of parents works. When is that? When the neder itself involves the parents. Rabbi say, now take a look for just a moment at the rush on the bottom right-hand corner. The rush, you see it? So we'll say it's about 2, 4, 6, about 7, 8 lines up from the bottom in the rush. Bedavar shebeino lebein aviv v'imo kigon shehidir aviv. So we'll say, the rush just gives a simple example of this. Let's say Reuven made a neder, right? He says to his father, Konam sha'at nenisli. Dad, you're not allowed to get any benefit from me. That was the neder he made. Now, in that case, the Gemara says, right, we could call him Reuven and we could say, Reuven, how do you realize that your neder would be an affront to your father? Would you have made it? And I both say, in that case, even the Chachamim agree that that's a proper Pesach. Why? Because the father himself is what? Is a party to the neder. So again, in other words, it seems to be the machlokes Chacham Rabbi Eliezer is just playing the parent card in a neder that has nothing to do with the parents. So in that case, Rabbi Eliezer says it still works. Chacham say it doesn't work. But everyone will agree that when the parents themselves, or a parent, is a party to the neder, that creating a Pesach through the honor of parents ultimately works. Incredible. Va'od Rabbi Eliezer is really great. So I tell you what's so fascinating about this. Now we're getting into the real mechanics of Hataras Nedarim, which is really fascinating. Va'od Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says as follows: Poschin benolad. We'll say also fascinating. You could create a Pesach through nolad. Then I will say, now what is nolad? Nolad means new circumstances. Let's say I will say new circumstances came to light after you made the neder. Those circumstances were not in effect at the time of the neder, but now based on the new circumstances, I would not have made the neder. So I will say, see, you hear this? See, generally, what does Pesach say? Pesach says, had I known then what I know now, I would not have made the neder. What happens if new information or new reality comes to light now that was not present? But had I known this new reality, or had this new reality been in effect, then I would have never made the neder. That's called nolad. Nolad is a new circumstance that just came about, that had it been in effect, or had it been present at the time I made the neder, I would have never made the neder. So does that create a proper Pesach? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Elazar says, Poschim Menolad. Chacham say, no, you can't create a Pesach out of Nolad. Rabbi say, what's the case? Ketzad. This is great. Amar, Kodam Shani Nana Li'ish Ploni. We'll say, watch this. I say, I make a neder. What's my neder? Konam Shani Nana L'Ruvain. I am not going to get any benefit from Ruvain. Okay, that's the neder. Fine. Then what happened? V'nah says sofer. Ruvain then becomes a sofer. Right? He becomes a sofer. So I say, so now what happens? And he's the only guy in town from whom to buy mezuzos. By the way, sofer can mean a lot of different things. We'll just go with a pashut understanding of it over here. Right? Ruvain goes in and becomes a sofer. Now, for example, the Rosh says, sofer doesn't mean a sofer. The Rosh says it means Talmud Chacham va'kol tzrichin lo. He's a teacher of Torah. He gives the only Daf Yomi Shiur, and I need to learn Daf Yomi. Right? So what am I going to do? So I'll say, so now what happened? I made a neder about Ruvain. Right? I'm not going to get a neder from Ruvain. That was before Ruvain Baruch Hashem became a sofer. Now he becomes a sofer, and now I need him. Now we'll say, had he been a sofer at the time of the neder, then what? I would not have made the neder. Or, for example, this is interesting. Osha hayamasi es vino. I was saying, or Reuven's marrying off his son, and this is going to be the wedding of the century, right? So again, 25 carving stations, right? Everything. So again, I would have never made a neder. 25 carving, 5 carving stations, 2 carving stations, right? I would have never made such a neder like this. So we'll say, so now what's the halacha? Lo hayisino there. So again, I say, Oshaya Masi is bino bekarov, lo hayisino there. So we'll say, so again, so I say, had I realized that Reuven was going to become a sofer, I would have never made the neder. Had I realized that Reuven was going to be making the chassan of the century, and I would have been invited, I would have never made the neder. So we'll say, here is the problem. The problem is, these circumstances were not in effect at the time the neder was made. This is called nolad, new circumstances. So once again, Rabbi Eliezer says, nolad circumstances can be used to create a Pesach. So in other words, had I known at the time of the neder that Reuven was going to become a sofer, had I known at the time of the neder that Reuven was going to go ahead and marry off his son, it was going to be the wedding of the century, I would have never made the neder. But as it says, that works. Chacham say, no, that's not works. You can't make a Pesach with nolad. I will say the only way to make a Pesach is what? With pre-existing circumstances. In other words, there have to be realities that existed at the time of the actual neder, but of which I was unaware. Fundamental machlokes. Incredible. Weiter. Konem bayis eshani nichnas. So I will say, watch this. Another case. I say, I'm never walking into this house. And then what happens, Rabbi say? Then what happens? V'nasa beis haknesses. It becomes a shul. Now I want to be able to go into the shul. So what happens? Amar ilu hayisi odeh shunasa beis haknesses lo hayisi noder. So once again, I will say this is another case of nolad. This case of nolad. Right? So I say, had I known that the house was going to become a shul, I would have never made the neder. So what's the halacha? Rabbi Eliezer matir. Ultimately, again, Rabbi Eliezer says it works. So we'll say Rabbi Eliezer says that you could create a Pesach out of nolad. You could create an opening for ataras Nedarim out of new circumstances. The Chum say, no, you can't. Chum say, absolutely not, it doesn't work. Now, I will say, let me show you something amazing. I can't hold back from sharing this with you now, even though, again, it's like a shtickle spoiler alert, because, again, you're going to get a little information, but I will say it's incredible. Take a look at the Rosh. So we'll say, why do the Chachamim say that nolad doesn't work? In other words, we'll say, think about this for just a moment. Rabbi Eliezer seems to kind of put forward a pretty strong argument. Again, I would say, take a look at this last case, right? Konam, I'm not entering into this house. And then the house becomes a shul. So I say, look, I would have never made the neder had I known that the house was going to become a shul. So Eliezer says, that works. Come and say, no, it doesn't work. We'll say, look at the Rush. So the Rush is, I have to get glasses. I think it's time in front of the Rush has convinced me. The Rush humbles me every single day. So it's 2, 4, 6, 7 lines up from the bottom. We'll say, look at the Rush. Va'od Amar Balazar, Kula achares benedarim pochsim benedarim benolad ki gon davar she'eno matsui benolad v'nischadish achar shenoder v'liyodem ekar she'ischadish davar zeh lo hayisi noder. So we'll say, the Rush adds in a very interesting word if you notice. What's the whole chap with nolad? The whole chap with nolad, davar she'eno matzui. We'll say, what does davar she'eno matzui mean? An uncommon development. We'll say the whole chap of nolad is that something happened that I didn't anticipate. Right? I make a neder not to go ahead and get benefit from Ruvain. Why do I say? Because I look at Ruvain, and what do I see when I look at Ruvain? Right? Not a bum. Right? I'll say, right, so nothing. He's not going to develop. Ruvain, I'm not looking. That was, I have to choose a separate guy. Right? Another shimon in the, right? I'll say, so again, so what happens? In other words, in general, I make a neder not to get benefit from someone, and I will say why. In other words, think about this. When would you make a neder not to get benefit from someone? Let's be honest. If I assume that what? That person has nothing to offer me. Right? So now suddenly Reuben gets his act together, right? Mazel tov, right? He gets his act together, and now he's the sofer, right? He's the sofer in town. So suddenly I need him. So the Rush says that is, in the Rush's word, is nolad is davar she'eno matzui. It's an uncommon reality. So I'll say, so now I understand the Chum. So Rabbi Elazar says, this works for Pesach. I'll say, look at the next Rush. The Chum say, listen to this. The taima de charata, and I will say, now understand, and this is really interesting. Every Pesach is embedded, or I should say, utilizes the element of charata. What's charata? Remorse. Or we'll say, what does a Pesach say? I regret having made this neder. Why do I regret having made this neder? Because had I known then what I know now, ultimately, let's say I would have not made the neder. So we'll say, remember, so this is interesting. So when we think about charata, we think about charata just like straight out charata. I regret having made the neder. Period. That's true. But every type of Pesach is embedded in some type of charata. So, all right, I regret having made the neder. Had I known then what I know now, I would not have made the neder. I.e., I regret having made the neder. So watch this. Chum said this. Tamid de charata, mishum sha'ayi de charata ne'kar ha-neder me'ikaro, u'bedavar she'eno matzui eno na'aseh neder ta'os me'ikaro. Shabbos says, this is incredible. What's the chap of hataras nedarim? Right? Let's take this forward for just a moment. When I go ahead and I say, I make a neder. Let's take an easy case in which that everybody agrees with. I make a neder not to allow my father to get benefit from me. And then they say, you know what, how'd you realize that this neder would be disparaging to your father? Would you have made it? And I say, no. So we'll say, what does that do? What that brings to mind is, had I known at the time that I made the neder, that this neder would have been embarrassing to my father, ultimately, again, I would have never made it. Therefore, I regret having made it. And that charata retroactively undoes the neder, right? It uproots the neder. That only works as the chum with something that is common. Let me illustrate this to you. Because in other words, what we say is, had you known at the time of the neder, or had you possessed at the time of the neder, the knowledge that you now possess, you would have never made the neder. But I will say, but that's not true with all pieces of knowledge. For example, let's say now I'm making a neder that Reuben shouldn't get benefit from me. And imagine at the time of the neder, someone said to me, but what happens if Reuben becomes a sofer? Right? What are you going to do? They both say, it's possible that I would have said what? Right? Reuven, a sofer? No way. Right? Or I'll roll the dice on that one. In other words, it's not so pashut that had someone presented me with the information that I would have not made the neder. Right? I make a neder not to go into a house. So someone says, 1 second, what happens if the house becomes a shul? House becomes a shul. What are the chances that the house is going to become a shul? So the Chum say the problem with nolad is often a set of unforeseen circumstances or unexpected circumstances, which even had I been presented with their possibility at the time I made the neder, I still may have what? I still may have gone through with the neder. Therefore, the Chachamim say, this is incredible. The Chachamim say the whole chap, with creating a Pesach through charata is because we're convinced that had you been presented with those facts at the time of the neder, you would have never made it. But with certain sets of facts, which are very uncommon, Eino Matzah, they're just not common, it's quite possible that even had I been presented with those facts at the time of the neder, I still would have made the neder. Therefore, the Chachamim say that can serve as grounds for creating a Pesach of charata. Incredible. And therefore the Chum say, you can't create a Pesach with no blood. Beautiful. So we'll say, so two fundamental machlokas in the Mishnah. But machlokas number one is the ability to go and create a Pesach with the covenant of parents. Right? Machlokas number two is the ability to create a Pesach with no blood. Good. Says the Gemara. So let's jump in. So what's the Mishnah say? So remember again the flow of the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer says you could create a Pesach with covenant of parents. In other words, Reuven made a neder unrelated to his parents. We call Reuven into the and Reuven, had you realized that your neder reflects poorly on your parents, would you have made it? And Reuven says, no. So Rabbi Eliezer says that's a proper Pesach. Chacham says it's not a Pesach. Rabbi Tzaddik says, I'll do you one even better. Why don't you call Reuven in and say, you know what, Reuven, had you realized that your Nedarim would reflect poorly on the Ribono Shel Olam, would you have made the Neder? And the Gemara, so that's Rabbi Tzaddik. But again, Amrulo, both Rabbi Eliezer and the Chum say back to Rabbi Tzaddik, no. If you do that, there's not going to be any Nedarim. So the Gemara says, so let's analyze that phrase. Mine ein Nedarim. What does that mean? What does that mean? So Abai says, Im kain ein Nedarim nitarin yafa. So what Abai says what's going to end up happening is Hataras Nedarim won't be done well. Now take a look at what say the Ran. Last Ran on the page. What does that mean? It says Ma'in Nedarim Amrabai Im kain ein Nedarim nitarin yafa. Shafilu im mitchila lo haya nimna mipnei kavod hamakom lo yoyis panad bekach b'fnei chacham v'yishaker v'yomer ilo ha'isi yoder lo ha'isi noder nimtza she'in nidarim mutarin yafa. Shabbos said, listen to this. This is what we mentioned before in the Mishnah. The problem with this approach, Shabbos say, is you back people into a corner. Shabbos say, what person, right? If he's brought into right, Reuven made a neder, he's brought into the base and he said, Reuven, had you realized that your neder was a theological affront to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, would you have made it? There's only one answer to that question, which is no. And even if he doesn't mean the no, he's going to answer no. So Abai says the problem just is with this Pesach is you're not going to have proper hataras nedarim because people are going to feel compelled, ultimately, again, to say no, even if they really would have made the neder anyway. And therefore, it turns out that Allah L'maisa, hataras nedarim is not going to happen in a proper way. So I will say, ultimately, again, that's Abayi's position. Amar Beis, Rava says, Im kain. Yeah, there's more to that Ran. Fine. So I will say, actually, just go back to the Ran for just a moment. I'm sorry. So that's why even in this case, just want to point out, even Rabbi Eliezer, who is of the opinion that poschen bekavod of v'imo, will agree that you cannot create a Pesach out of the kavod of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because essentially what that does is it creates an impossibility for the noder. People are simply not going to be truthful about their intentions because it's too embarrassing to say that, yes, I would have made the neder even had I realized it was an affront to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So you both say, see, here's what's interesting. Rabbi Eliezer would say, people, they'll say that Reuven makes a neder, they call him the days and say, Reuven, had you realized that your neder was going to be an affront to your parents, would you have made it? See, Rabbi say, what is Reuven going to answer? What is Reuven going to answer? Maybe yes, maybe no. In other words, we'll say, with parents, it's a roll of the dice. It's a roll of the dice. In other words, a person might say, yeah, I don't care about my parents, I don't like my parents, I love my parents, but I need to make this neder anyway, it's something I need to do in life. It's possible he can answer, it's quite Rabbi Eliezer, he can still answer truthfully. In the Kavod HaMakom scenario, no one's going to answer truthfully. I was going to say, everyone's going to feel compelled to say, of course I would have never made this neder had I realized it was an affront to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Therefore you skew, or essentially you undermine, the entire process of Hataras. That's Abai. Rava says on the base, Im kain ein nedarim nishalin l'chacham. Rava says no, there's another mechanistic problem. What's the mechanistic problem? No one is going to go to a chacham for Hataras nedarim. Meaning what was it? Take a look at the Ran. Ran is on the right hand side of the page. Rava Amar Im kain ein nedarim nishalin l'chacham. Im kain de poschin lo bekavod hamakom. Lo yiyu nidarim nishalim l'chacham shekol echad ve'echad poseach pesach ze liatzmo shay pesach ze roi l'chol nidarim. So this is fascinating. Rabbi says we have a logistical issue. What's our logistical issue? If this really was a proper Pesach, then what? No one is ever going to go to a chacham for hataras nedarim. Rather, Rabbi say, how are people going to do hataras nedarim? In the comfort of your own home. Right? Because also remember again, if this is a proper Pesach, in other words, if there is such a Pesach, had I known that the neder is an affront to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I've never made the neder, so ultimately, again, I don't need to go to anyone. I could just do that myself. And the problem is, I will say what? You can't do hataras nedarim yourself. That in fact does not work. So halacha l'maisa, so I'll say, so here's what's interesting. Remember, everyone is agreeing that ultimately, poschin bekavad hamakom, using the dignity or the honor of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as a Pesach does not work. Machlokas Abaye and Rav as to why it doesn't work. Abaye says, because people aren't going to be truthful. Everyone's going to be forced to say, or feel compelled to say, of course I would have never made the neder had I known it was an affront to the dignity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Rav says, there's just going to be a breakdown of hataras nedarim, because everyone is just going to assume that you could do hataras nedarim yourself. So we'll say, let's analyze. Tnan, Modim Chachamim Rabbi Eliezer, B'davar Shebein Olivin Ava V'imo, Sheposchen Lo B'kavod Ava V'imo. And remember again, this is now the second part of the Mishnah, that everyone does agree, if Reuven made a neder, that directly impacts his parents, right? Reuven made a neder that his father can't get hana'ah from him. So in that case, the Chachamim do agree with Rabbi Eliezer that you could use the dignity of the parents to create a Pesach. Now watch this. Bishlam ala Abaye, so according to Abaye, the Amar Imkein in Nedarim Nitarin, Hacha kevan de ichtziflei, ha ichtziflei. So now according to Abaye, who says that the whole problem with kavod hamakom was that people won't have the chutzpah to answer or to speak their mind. In this case, it makes sense. Why, Rabosai? Because since Lamaisa Reuven had the chutzpah to make a neder, prohibiting his father from getting hana'ah from him, Reuven would also have the chutzpah to answer truthfully. As Rabosai, when confronted, see, here's what's interesting. When confronted ultimately, right, so let's play out the case. Reuven made a neder that his father Yaakov can't get benefit from him. So now, we call Reuven in today and we say, Reuven, this neder is such an embarrassment to your father. Had you realized that this neder would cause an embarrassment to your father, would you have made it? Now, we'll say, now, why is that a proper Pesach? Because the Gemara says because the same Reuven who made the neder, Reuven's not a fool, he knows that the neder is an embarrassment to his father, but he made it anyway. So therefore, the fact that he made it will also allow him to answer the Beis Din correctly as well. And if indeed, again, he doesn't mind being a mechutzav to his parents, the neder will stand. So because we know that he'll answer truthfully, therefore, again, the Pesach works. In this case, don't we have to still be concerned for the concern of Rava? Remember again, what was Rava's concern? Rava's concern is that if we create these type of Pesach, right? Again, we're speaking specifically about the Pesach of Kavod HaMakom, everyone's going to do Hom HaTaras Nedarim, right? Hom HaTaras, they're going to think they don't need a Chacham. Wouldn't that same concern apply in this case? To which the Gemara says, Amri, Kevan Dechol Nidre, Lo Sagi Lahom Delav Chacham, Hachanami Poschim. It's different, says the Gemara. It says, Rav even agrees that in this case it'll work. Why? Because since a person knows that in every other case they require a chacham, therefore halacha l'maisa, they're not going to take liberties with hataras nedarim in this case, even though again hataras nedarim in this case is perhaps a little bit more intuitive because it has to do with the dignity of the parent. But halacha l'maisa, they're going to realize that since in every other case we require a Beis Din, so too in this case, or at least a Talmud Chacham, so too in this case, they're going to require a Talmud Chacham. We'll say, take a look at the Ran for just a moment. The Ran is in the intermediate wide lines, third to last intermediate wide line. Kevan Nechol Nidre, Lo Sagye, Luhu Belocha, Shari B'Shar Nedarim, Ein Poschin, so we'll say, so ultimately, since in all other cases of Nedarim, i.e. Nedarim that don't have to do with the honor of the parents, right? We don't allow a Pesach based on the honor of the parents. When we talk She'eni Yodea Limso Ben Pesach, Tzarachu Shi'elech Eitzel Chacham. So we'll say, since in general, we're not allowing Kavod Ovid in Imo to be a Pesach in all Nedarim, but only in specific Nedarim, and therefore a person is used to going to a Chacham for Hataras Nedarim, he'll come to go to the Chacham even in this case where Kavod of the Imo is a proper Pesach. Say for Abosai, what we have over here is as follows. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, we're left with a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, right? Namely, is the honor of parents, or the dishonor to parents, a proper Pesach for a neder which has nothing to do with parents? Rabbi Eliezer says yes. The Chachamim say no. Chachamim say no. First of all, we'll say, so again, okay, fine. Then you have Rabbi Tzadok. Rabbi Tzadok wants to say, well, if honor of parents is enough to create a Pesach, or I should say dishonor to parents, is enough to create a Pesach, in the case of an neder that has nothing to do with parents, then what else should work? Dishonor to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But both Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim say, no, that can't work. Why? Because imkain ein Nedarim. If that's the case, there's going to be no Nedarim. What's the problem with this no Nedarim? I'll say, so machlokes Abaye and Rava. Abaye says, no Nedarim means, if any person you call into business and you say, listen, had you realized that your neder was a dishonor to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, would you have made it? There's only one way to answer that question, which is no. And therefore, Abaye says people are going to be dishonest. People are going to be dishonest, and therefore you undermine the whole idea of Atar Saddam. Rava says, no. The issue is, people are going to get smart, and they're going to say, well, if dishonor to God is the proper Pesach, then what? I don't need to go to Beis Din. I could just annul my own Nedarim, and you have an entire breakdown of the system of Atar Saddam. So we'll say, that's the machlokes. How do we paskin? Both sides? So we paskin in this case like the Chachamim, namely that using dishonor to parents as a Pesach in a neder that has nothing to do with parents. That's what we're talking about now, right? Reuven makes a neder. I'm not going to drink wine up until the katsir, up until the fig harvest. Say, Reuven, you're now a noder. You're now a noder. And do you know how badly it reflects on your family that you're a noder? Right? Now again, that doesn't do with his parents. So Chacham say that is not a proper Pesach. That is how we paskin. We paskin that using the dignity of parents to create a Pesach, to create an opening for a Hataras Nedarim, does not work. Like the Chacham. Therefore, we'll say, by extension, of course, we also know that, of course, you can't be posting the kavod hamakom. Obviously, again, if it's not going to work to use the honor of parents to create a Pesach, it's certainly what? Not going to work to use the kavod of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to create a Pesach either. Good. And we'll say, now we go weiter. So we'll say, remember again, what was the next major machlokes in the Gemara? The next major machlokes was nolad. So we'll say, what's nolad? So exciting. What's nolad? New circumstance. So we'll say, so remember again, the paradigmatic example, or I should say, the normative, before we saw this Mishnah, we'll say, the normative framework for Ataras Nedarim is how does it work? Again, Reuven, the Noder, says, there's certain information that I have now, right, that was present at the time of the neder, but what? I was unaware of that information. Had I been aware of that information at the time I made the neder, I would have never made the neder. That's the Pesach. So I will say, it's kind of like lahavdil. You know how, again, if you try to get insurance, right, but you have pre-existing conditions, right, so you might have problems. So again, that's what a Pesach is. A Pesach is pre-existing conditions, but I was unaware of it. That's the whole chap over here. There was information present at the time of the neder of which I was unaware. But had I been aware, I would have never made the neder. So now we'll say, what's nolad? Nolad is new information that came about when? After I made the neder. But had I known about that information, had I known this was going to occur, I would have never made the neder. That's nolad. Rabbi Eliezer says, that's a valid Pesach. Chacham say, not a valid Pesach. So here we go. So my time with Rabbi Eliezer was so exciting. So Eliezer says, why does nolad work? So I'll say, now remember again, we saw in the rush, why doesn't nolad work? Remember again, I'll say one more moment. According to Chacham, why doesn't nolad work? Because the whole chap of charata only works if what? Common circumstances, which if they were known, a person wouldn't have made a neder. The whole chap of nolad, to bar the lashon of the rush, the whole chap of nolad is what's his lashon? Was davar shena matzoi. Thank you. It's a davar shena matzoi. It's an uncommon development. So because it's an uncommon development, it's not pashit that even had the noder thought about this possibility, he may still have made the neder. So let's say, so now here we go. Says the Gemara, my time Rabbi Eliezer. So what's Rabbi Eliezer's logic? That nolad is a proper that Nolad allows for Hataras Nedarim. What's the reason? Amrav Chista Damar Krabos is incredible. He quotes on a pasuk. Damar Krabos, the pasuk says, Ki Meisu Kol Anashim. So we'll say, now watch this. It's incredible. Because, okay, let me fill in the blanks a little bit over here. So, if you look at the Ran, so the Ran supposed to say in the wide lines, it's 2, 4, 6, 7 lines up from the bottom. This is HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaking to Moshe when Moshe Rabbeinu is in Midyan. Right, so remember again, Moshe Rabbeinu fled Egypt, went to Midyan, got married, settled down, and was living with Yisrael. Meets HaKadosh Baruch Hu by the burning bush. HaKadosh Baruch Hu essentially conscripts him into the service of God. And now Hashem says to Moshe, by the way, time for you to go down to Egypt, because all the people who wanted to kill you, they all died. They all died. So now look at the Ran. Ki Meisar Kol Nashim Avakshim Es Nafshecha, Afal Gav V'Yisro Hishbiya L'Moshe, K'Dechsiv Vayom Moshe L'Sheves Es HaIsh, V'Yitlan Sipora, Afilu Hachi Moshe Rabbeinu Lo Hayam Nishba, El Midor She'Yorek Midasam Va'aviram. U'Levichach, Pasach Lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ki Meisar Kol Nashim Avakshim Es Nafshecha. I both say this is incredible. Moshe Rabbeinu had made a neder or a refuah. Right? What was the neder? Right? Yisro adjured him. Right? Yisro made him make a neder or a refuah, but he's not going to go ahead and leave Midyan. Okay. Now what happens? So Moshe is under oath not to leave Midyan. Now what happens? God says to Moshe, you can come back now. You can go back now to Mitzrayim. Why? Because the people who wanted to harm you are dead. So the Rebbe Elazar says, we're supposed to say death is a case of nolad, right? New circumstances. Okay, Moshe, you agreed to this neder, or you agreed to this oath at a particular time because you were in danger. Now the people who posed a danger to you are dead. So therefore again, and yet Rebbe saying, what happens? What's the end of the story? Moshe goes back down to Mitzrayim. So this is, what do you see from here? Poschin lo Pesach benolad. You by Poschin lo benolad, you could create a Pesach benolad. Again, Rebbe says, paradigmatic example. These guys, Rebbe said, by the way, isn't this like a ridiculously amazing conversation? God is telling Moshe to go down to Egypt, right? So I say that should kind of be like where the conversation begins and ends, right? We're done here. We're done here. So I say, but what do you see? Lo ba shamayim, right? Torah is not in shamayim, and therefore even in the way we conduct our lives, even if the baskol comes out, right, you have to conduct your life in accordance with the framework of Torah, right? There's no dispensations for the framework of Torah, right? Everyone, even Moshe Rabbeinu, is bound by the framework of halacha. I will say it's an incredible, sometimes we think, I have extenuating circumstances, and my extenuating circumstances allow me to live outside of the confines of halacha. No one lives outside of the confines of halacha. Even Moshe Rabbeinu to go down to Egypt, it's not just enough, well, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told me to do so. No, there needs to be a mechanism. Moshe, you're under oath, you need a Pesach. What's your Pesach? What's Moshe Rabbeinu's Pesach? Nolad. Dasan and Abiram, who wanted to harm Moshe Rabbeinu, are dead. So in fact that Moshe Rabbeinu was such an incredible Musa, right? We think again, I have extenuating circumstances, and my extenuating circumstances allow me to do this, or not to have to do this. If Moshe Rabbeinu needs a Pesach to go down to Mitzrayim, then no matter what is happening in my life, I have to make sure that I live my life within the confines of halacha as well. So dramatic. So the Gemara says, V'Rabbanan, my tamayim. So we'll say, what's the Rabbanan's logic? So again, it sounds pretty compelling. Why do the Rabbanan say this? Why do the Rabbanan say that you can't create a Pesach with nolad? Kasavri hano mi maisi. They say no. Dasan Adim didn't die. They didn't die. They'll say they weren't dead. Vaha Amr B'Yocham Mishram B'Shem and Yochai. Kol Makom Shneimar Nitzim Nitzavim Eino Ela Dasan V'Aviram. They both say Dasan and Aviram are alive and kicking for a very long time. When do Dasan and Aviram ultimately die? When do they die? In the rebellion of Korach. Right? That's when they die. But they're alive and well. So what happened? Ela Amr Shlakish Sheyardu Minechseim. Dasan and Aviram didn't die. Rather, I will say, what happened? They became poor. And I will say, now here's what's interesting. So how does that answer the question? All right, we'll have to stop over here for today. I know, I'm leaving on a cliffhanger. I will say, so again, okay, so that's fine. They didn't die. They just became poor. Fine. How does that answer up the problem? I will say, Mirat Hashem to be continued tomorrow. Started leaving in the cliffhanger. Shkoyach. Incredible Gemara tomorrow, I will say. Ridiculously incredible Gemara tomorrow. I'm sorry?
I just want us to come back.
Yeah. That is true also. All right, Chaim, have a great day, everyone.
You don't care about starting kids in Africa?